Savo Reserve, mid-morning. The heat had already begun to climb, pressing down on the open plain, when the sound first carried across the distance. It was not a trumpet of strength, but a short, sharp burst, broken, irregular, and coming again with more strain each time. The rangers moved toward it quickly, their boots sinking into the softened earth where the riverbank had collapsed days earlier. As they reached the edge of the mud pit, the source of the sound was revealed. A calf, no more than a few months old, lay sunk deep into the collapsed wall, his sides coated in dried earth that cracked against his ribs with each shallow breath. His trunk shifted weakly in the air, trying to reach upward, then fell back into the pit's edge with no strength left to lift it again. The mud had caved around him in a circle, creating a hard shell that pinned his flanks in place. Each time he struggled, the ground pulled tighter, as if determined not to release him. His cries came in short bursts, loud enough to echo against the far reeds but too broken to call for long. The rangers knew the sound well. It was the call of distress that meant the herd had already left or had been forced to abandon him. If no one reached him, his lungs would tire, and he would not last through the day. One of the men, Elian, crouched low at the pit's rim. He measured the calf's breathing with his eyes, watching the flanks rise and fall too quickly, then fall still for long gaps. The calf's ears twitched once, heavy with dried mud, then stilled again. His condition made the risk plain. If the rescuers moved too suddenly, the calf might exhaust himself fighting against the pressure. But if they waited too long, his breath would fail. In silence, they dropped their packs and began pulling ropes free, every hand moving with care. The pit's floor was slick, each step pulling at their boots. Two rangers eased down slowly, avoiding sudden noise. The calf's head lifted as they neared, trunk swinging toward them with confusion. His eyes showed neither aggression nor calm, only the unsteady flicker of an animal caught between fear and weakness. When Elian reached forward, he let his hand rest just short of the calf's flank. The calf shifted once, weak legs kicking, then fell still again. That was all the space they needed. The mud clung tightly. With each attempt to free a flank, more earth slid down, threatening to close the gap. They dug carefully, pulling with flat palms, breaking the hardened crust by hand before it could cut against the calf's skin. The calf called out once more, louder, trunk stretching toward the rim as if reaching for something unseen. His cry broke halfway through, collapsing into a rough cough. The rangers froze until his breathing steadied again, then returned to their work. Minutes stretched under the sun. The ropes were slid beneath his chest, each tug pulling the calf upward only a little before the ground resisted. Twice he shifted sideways, sinking back with a sound like suction. The risk grew sharper each time. If the mud tightened further, his lungs would be pinned. Elian leaned close and whispered once, steady and quiet, "Hold on, little one." The calf's trunk brushed the ground near his boots, not in understanding, but in simple collapse. By the time the front legs were freed to the knee, the calf's strength had waned. His calls no longer rose into the air but stayed low, barely above breath. The rescuers knew the truth. If he slipped deeper, there would be no recovering him. The urgency now was plain, yet still they moved with slow steadiness, using every pause to let him breathe before the next pull. The ropes strained. The calf's body shifted again, this time enough for his chest to rise higher above the rim of the hardened mud. His breath caught, then came louder, filling his trunk with sound. For the first time since they had reached him, the rangers saw his ears lift, clumsy but alive. The action was small, but it carried weight. He was still strong enough to try. That alone gave them cause to continue. The pit, however, was not finished with him. Every pull widened cracks along the bank, sending new sheets of soil sliding toward his body. If one of them fell across his head, the chance of survival would vanish. Elian glanced once at the others. then shifted the rope higher under the calf's chest. They pulled again, this time leaning their weight into the effort. The calf's body lifted slightly, legs scrabbling weakly at the rim of the pit, then fell back. The suction closed around him again. For a moment, the only sound was his labored breath. The Rangers did not let go. If they gave up now, he would die where he lay. The air hung heavy with heat. The calf's trunk pressed flat against the mud, trembling once more before curling back weakly against his chest. His eyes closed, opened again, and held. Every movement now carried the risk of collapse. The rescuers knew the balance had narrowed. If they forced him too quickly, his body might not withstand it. If they hesitated, the mud would finish what it had started. The first chapter of his rescue closed with that fragile pause. A calf, half freed but still locked to the earth, his trunk rising weakly through dust and heat, his life balanced between the weight of the ground and the steady hands working to draw him back. The ropes were already in place when the second effort began. The calf's chest had risen higher in the pit, but the earth clung stubbornly to his sides, filling each gap as quickly as it was made. The Rangers widened their stance at the rim. Their boots pressed deep into the soft soil and began to pull. The calf let out a sudden, piercing cry, louder than any before, and his trunk shot upward, twisting against the open air before falling limp again. The sound echoed over the plain, and within moments answering rumbles carried from a distance. The herd had not left after all. Across the low ridge, gray shapes moved slowly into view. At first, only 3, then 5, and finally more, fanning out as they approached the pit. The matriarch led them, her ears spread wide, her trunk raised high as she took in the scent of the mud, the calf, and the men surrounding him. She did not charge, nor did she retreat. She stopped short, perhaps 20 paces away, and let out a low, rolling call. The others answered behind her, forming a loose half-circle around the pit, their bodies shifting uneasily. Their weight pressed into the earth, their silence broken only by low rumbles and the shuffle of shifting feet. The Rangers froze in their pulling. The tension was immediate and unmistakable. If the herd pressed closer, the men would have to retreat, leaving the calf to the pit. But if they stepped back now, the calf's strength would bleed away in minutes. Elian kept one hand firm on the rope, his gaze steady on the matriarch. Her head swayed, slow and deliberate before lowering again. For now, she did not advance. It was as much permission as they would receive. The men resumed, pulling carefully, muscles straining as they tried to raise the calf higher. The mud shifted reluctantly, releasing only inches before clamping shut again. Each time the rope tightened, more of the bank slid back into the hollow. The shovels were brought forward, their edges pressing into the hardened crust, breaking it apart where hands could not. Every strike made the herd stir, their trunks lifting sharply, but the Rangers kept their movements calm, steady, no sudden noise. The calf groaned low in his throat, the sound weak but insistent. After 20 minutes, his front legs were nearly clear. The ropes cut across his chest, pulling his weight forward. But the suction around his hindquarters resisted with the strength of stone. Twice he kicked, hooves splashing against wet soil, and twice he sank back. The mud was taking as much as the men were giving. One ranger knelt beside him and used both arms to dig at the space around his leg, his sleeves caked in earth up to the elbow. The calf thrashed weakly once, then stilled, his head dropping to the side in exhaustion. "If he stops fighting, we lose him," one of the men said quietly, breath sharp with effort. Elian only nodded. The truth was plain. An elephant that young could not survive on stillness. He needed to keep pushing, even if only in the smallest movements. The ropes strained again, another heave pulling him forward a hand's width, then no more. The bank closed around his flanks like a tightening grip. Behind them, the matriarch stepped closer, her shadow falling across the edge of the pit. The Rangers stiffened but did not retreat. She lifted her trunk and released a low call, softer than before, directed at the calf. His ears twitched faintly in answer. For a moment, the air held still. Then his trunk lifted once more, weak but clear, curling toward her before falling again. That brief response was enough to stir her to silence. She did not move forward again. The rangers pressed harder, digging, pulling, reshaping the walls with each shove of the shovel. Mud closed in as quickly as it was cleared. But the action continued, steady, relentless. The calf's cries no longer carried as far, but each sound still rose above the pit, tethering the herd in place. The men knew they were working against two ticking measures, the mud that would not release him and the lungs that might soon give out. If they failed to free him soon, the weight of the earth would win. By the time the sun reached its height, the calf's front half was fully exposed, his forelegs trembling on solid ground, his head lifting now and then in broken bursts of breath. His back half, however, remained locked, the suction unbroken. The rangers paused, leaning against their shovels, breath hard but steady. The herd waited in silence. The battle with the mud was not yet won, but the calf was still alive, still answering. For the moment, that was enough. The ropes were reset lower, looped carefully beneath the calf's belly where the mud still clung hardest. The heat pressed down now with full weight. The sun reflecting off the wet ground until even the ranger's shadows blurred. Flies gathered at the calf's ears and along the cracks in his dried hide, but he had no strength left to swat them away. His breaths came sharp and shallow, each one sounding less certain than the last. The men worked quickly, yet every movement was deliberate, steady, designed not to startle him or draw the herd into panic. Elian crouched at the edge of the pit, pulling the rope taut until he felt the resistance of the calf's frame. He looked once at the others and gave a single nod. Together, they leaned back with all their weight. The rope strained, creaking against the pull. For a moment, the calf rose a few inches, his hindquarters shifting free of the suction, but as soon as the men eased to catch their breath, the mud swallowed him back down with a wet, pulling sound. The calf groaned low, his trunk stretching forward, then collapsing again into the soil. The risk was plain in every heave. The ropes cut into his side with each pull, and though the calf's skin was thick, the pressure could break blood vessels or strain his still-growing frame. Yet there was no other choice. If they did not use their full strength, the mud would never release him. If they used too much, they might harm him beyond repair. Between the two dangers they carried on, one heave after another, each time buying only inches before losing ground again. The herd shifted restlessly nearby. The matriarch let out a low rumble, deeper than before, her ears flaring with each call. She moved a step closer, then stopped, her trunk lifting as if to test the air between them. The rangers kept their eyes on their work, never turning their backs to her but never breaking rhythm either. They knew if she pushed forward, the rescue would end in an instant. All they had was her patience, and it was thinning with every sound of the calf's distress. Elian leaned forward again, his hands coated with thick layers of earth. He whispered once, his voice nearly lost under the weight of straining ropes. "Hold on, little one." The words were not meant to comfort, not in any human sense, but to steady the men themselves. The calf's trunk lifted faintly at the sound, curling half an arc before falling. It was enough to prove he was still aware, still fighting in the only way he could. They pulled again, harder this time, shovels breaking the hardened walls where the suction held tightest. The soil cracked and shifted, but the mud responded with equal force, drawing back as if it were a living thing determined to keep its hold. The calf's hind legs moved feebly, hooves scraping against the pit wall without finding purchase. His head dropped again, ears twitching once, then lying still. For a breath, the rescuers thought he might stop altogether. One man pressed a hand quickly to his flank, felt the shallow rise and fall, and gave the nod to continue. Minutes dragged into an hour. The sun bore down with no relief, and the calf's cries had dwindled to faint grunts, each one shorter, each one closer to silence. The ropes cut deeper into the mud, pulling his body forward until his spine began to angle upward, half his frame resting above the rim. Yet, with every pause, the suction fought back, threatening to drag him down again. The ground was not simply holding him, it was consuming him piece by piece. By the time the rangers stopped to rest, sweat streaked their faces and their arms trembled from strain. The calf lay still but not lifeless. His trunk twitched once in the dust, his breath rattling but present. The truth remained as sharp as ever. If they stopped pulling, the pit would claim him. If they pressed too hard, his body might give out before he was free. Every choice from here carried the same cost. His survival balanced on the thinnest margin of time and strength. The ropes tightened once more, every man leaning back with his full weight. The sound of straining fiber mixed with the low groan of shifting mud. For a long moment, nothing happened. The calf's body locked tight in place, the suction holding him as if fused to the earth itself. Then, with a sudden crack of wet soil breaking, his body shifted sideways. The calf lurched, his torso rolling against the wall of the pit, and his front legs spilled forward onto firmer ground. The impact sent dust rising, but for the first time, he was no longer entirely trapped. The calf collapsed forward, his chest heaving against the edge, mud sliding off in thick sheets as his legs kicked weakly in the open air. A sharp cry tore from his throat, louder than any before, his trunk shooting upward with desperate force. He exhaled hard, a gust that sent clumps of soil scattering from his face. The sound carried across the plain, and the herd answered instantly with a chorus of rumbles, the matriarch's voice rising above the rest. The call was not panicked but strong, steady, as if she had been waiting for this moment. The rangers did not pause. Elian dropped low, guiding the ropes higher under the calf's torso, urging the others forward with a quick gesture. They heaved again, the mud releasing another thick band around his flank. The calf's forelegs pressed against the ground, trembling but searching for grip. Twice they folded beneath him, and twice he tried again, finding only fleeting purchase before sliding back into the slick edge. Each failure threatened to undo the fragile ground he had gained. "Steady, now," Elian murmured, more to his team than to the calf. Every pull had to count. They could not allow him to sink back fully. The ropes strained again, and with each heave the calf's body inched higher. His trunk remained lifted, curling wide in the air, not in triumph but in the raw instinct of survival. The sight alone fueled the men's effort. The suction beneath him fought to reclaim its hold, dragging at his hindquarters with relentless weight. The mud swallowed around his legs each time he slipped, sucking him backward until it seemed he might vanish again. But now the calf had leverage. His front half rested solidly on firmer soil, and with every weak push of his forelegs he broke more of the suction's grip. What minutes before had been only resistance was now a contest. If he could keep moving, the pit would no longer have him. The herd pressed closer, the matriarch stepping forward until only a narrow stretch of earth separated her from the pit. Her ears spread wide, her trunk reached low, the air vibrating with her rumble. The calf answered faintly, trunk swinging once toward her before sagging back. The exchange lasted only seconds, but its meaning was clear. He was still alive, still calling, still worth saving. The men pulled again, shovels breaking the last of the hardened crust that ringed his back legs. Each strike of metal on earth sent cracks running outward, loosening the ground that had held him for so long. The calf's forelegs slipped once more, then steadied. His chest lifted higher, his trunk stretched into the sky, and his breath came not in broken bursts but in a long, forceful exhale that carried relief through the air. For the first time, he was not only surviving, he was moving. The risk remained plain. If they faltered, he could slide back, and the mud would claim him with finality. But now the balance had shifted. The calf had shown his strength, however fragile, and the men knew the end was near. With each heave, with each shovelful of earth cast aside, the distance between life and loss narrowed. The calf pressed forward again, his body no longer still but working with them, every small movement a sign that he had not given up. The final pull brought the calf free. His body slid forward with a heavy thud, collapsing onto firmer ground, mud peeling away in sheets as his flanks heaved for air. For the first time since the rescue began, he lay clear of the pit, no longer held by the sucking earth that had trapped him. The Rangers stepped back, breathing hard, ropes falling slack in their hands. The calf remained motionless for several seconds, sides rising and falling in sharp rhythm, trunk spread flat against the soil as though it carried the weight of his whole body. Then, slowly, he began to move. His forelegs stretched out first, pressing shakily into the dirt. They bent immediately beneath him, sending his chest back to the ground with a dull slump. A low groan left his throat, weak but insistent, followed by another attempt. This time he managed to raise his shoulders higher, ears flicking as if testing balance. His legs trembled violently, knees bending in awkward angles, and again he fell. The earth cushioned his body, but each collapse stole breath and strength from him. Elian crouched at his side, careful not to touch him at first. The calf's head turned slightly, trunk brushing against the air, searching. His breathing came ragged, desperate, and loud enough for the herd to answer. A rolling rumble carried across the distance, the matriarch calling, her body restless at the edge of the plain. The calf's ears twitched faintly in response, but his legs folded again when he tried to rise. His strength was not yet enough. If he could not walk, he would never rejoin them. The Rangers exchanged glances but said nothing. All knew the same truth. An elephant that cannot stand does not return to the herd. Without them, a calf this young has no chance. The ropes and shovels had done their part. What remained was his own will to stand. Elian shifted closer, placing one hand softly against the calf's shoulder to steady him. The young body leaned heavily into the contact, not with trust, but with exhaustion, using any support it could find. For a fleeting moment, the weight of the calf pressed fully against Elian's side. Then, with another collapse, he fell back into the dust. Sweat stung the men's eyes as they watched him struggle. The sun climbed higher, heat drawing steam from the wet soil still clinging to his skin. Each time he tried to rise, his efforts grew weaker, his cries shorter, his trunk dragging along the ground in shallow arcs. The herd called again, the matriarch's voice stronger this time, urging him forward. He answered faintly, trunk lifting only inches before sagging. The connection held, but the distance between them stretched wider with every failed attempt. Elian whispered once, steady, almost beneath his breath, "Easy. Just breathe." The words carried no solution, only rhythm, meant to pace the men as much as the calf. The young elephant's ears flicked at the sound, but he stayed collapsed. His chest rose and fell in quick bursts. The risk had returned in full. If his legs failed him now, if his body gave in to exhaustion, the hours of rescue would mean nothing. At last, he shifted again. His forelegs pressed hard into the ground, trembling violently, his hindquarters lifting just enough to balance. He swayed, nearly falling, then leaned once more against Elian's steadying hand. It was not strength but stubborn instinct that kept him upright for that moment. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. His legs folded, his body collapsing into the dust once more. Silence followed, broken only by the heavy rhythm of his breath. The Rangers stood quietly around him. They could do no more than wait. His survival now depended not on ropes or shovels, but on his ability to rise. Without that, he would never walk back into the circle of his herd. The calf lay still for several minutes, his body rising and falling in sharp bursts, each breath noisy in the silence that followed his collapse. Elian stayed kneeling at his side, one hand resting gently near his shoulder, not to hold him, but to remind him of presence. The Rangers formed a quiet circle, waiting. None spoke. They knew his strength was running out, and if he could not rise soon, his body would shut down. Then, from far across the plain, a sound rolled low through the air. It was not the faint reply of earlier, but a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to shake the ground itself. Every head turned toward the ridge. Gray shapes moved slowly into view, one by one, until the herd stretched across the horizon. They had not abandoned him. The matriarch led the line, her ears wide, her step unhurried but unbroken, each footfall sending small clouds of dust rising. The younger elephants clustered around her sides, their trunks restless, weaving in the air as the smell of mud and calf reached them. They called again, softer notes echoing across the dry plain. The calf stirred at once. His ears twitched, his trunk lifted a few inches, and a faint cry left his throat. The sound was thin, trembling, and carried only half the strength of his earlier calls, but it was enough. The matriarch answered immediately, her rumble stronger, deliberate, and close enough now to vibrate the air between them. The rangers froze in place, ropes slack in their hands, shovels lowered to the ground. Any sudden move could break the fragile line between herd and calf. The matriarch stepped closer, closing the distance with heavy, even strides. Her eyes fixed on the pit, her head high, ears spread in warning but not in rage. Elian remained steady, lowering his gaze without shifting away. The balance was as thin as it could be. If she pushed forward in fear or anger, all of their work would end. Yet she did not stop. She drew within only a few paces, her trunk extending low, curling once through the air, as if pulling his scent toward her. The calf lifted his trunk again, higher this time, and called out once more. It cracked in the middle, weakened by exhaustion, but its direction was clear. He was answering her. His thin cry settled over the plain, and the herd stirred behind her, their calls layering together until the air seemed filled with a low chorus of sound. The matriarch paused, swaying her head slowly, then lowered her trunk almost to the ground, rumbling once in reply. Elian whispered softly, just one line meant for his team alone. He knows they're here. The truth of it was visible in the calf's trembling movements. His body still shook with fatigue, but his eyes had lifted, his ears twitching toward the sound, and his trunk kept searching the air for the herd's reply. The connection was fragile but alive. The rangers stayed motionless, hands ready but respectful, their presence no longer the center of the rescue. Now it was between calf and herd. The air carried their voices back and forth, each sound trading strength across the gap. If the calf could hold on long enough, if his body did not collapse before they reached him, he might yet walk back into their circle. But if his strength failed completely, he would lie here while the herd watched, too late to save him. The matriarch stepped forward once more, ears held wide, her call rolling deep as thunder. The calf's answer came again, thin but clear. It was not the cry of despair that had marked the morning. It was something smaller but steadier. Recognition. The herd advanced slowly, their broad shadows stretching over the plain. The matriarch led them, each step heavy but measured, her trunk swinging low as she closed the final distance. The rangers knew the moment had come. They stepped back, ropes falling slack, shovels left where they stood. None dared to interfere now. Their work was finished. What happened next belonged to the herd. The matriarch stopped at the calf's side. Dust rose around her as she bent her great head low, her trunk reaching with deliberate care. The calf stirred weakly, his body trembling as he tried to rise again but could not. He gave a thin cry, almost a whisper, and in answer, the matriarch laid the tip of her trunk gently across his back. She held it there, not pressing, only resting, the weight light and steady. The sound that followed was a low rumble, rolling deep within her chest, the kind that spoke of reassurance more than command. Behind her, another elephant stepped forward, Younger, smaller, likely a sister or cousin, she brushed her trunk along his flank, leaving a streak in the mud still clinging to his side. Then another followed, then another, each one reaching out in turn, touching his body softly before stepping back into the half-circle. No trumpet, no panic, no clash. Only silence and touch, one after another, as though stitching him back into the fabric of the herd. The calf's ears flicked, his trunk lifting faintly in return. He made no attempt to stand this time. His body still shook with exhaustion, legs bent beneath him. But his eyes followed each touch, his breathing growing slower, less frantic. The contact calmed him where ropes and hands never could. The matriarch rumbled again, longer this time, and the herd answered in a wave of low vibration that seemed to settle the dust itself. The rangers watched from their place at the edge, none speaking, each caught in the stillness of the moment. Hours of work, sweat, and strain had brought the calf here, but it was this quiet exchange that would decide if he belonged again. Elian felt the weight of it settle in his chest. He had guided ropes and dug mud, but he could not give what the herd was giving now. They were offering him a place, not rescue. The calf shifted once more, his body leaning toward the matriarch's steady touch. He let out a sound too soft to echo far, but the herd heard it. Several trunks reached for him at once, brushing his shoulders, his sides, his face still streaked with earth. It was as though every member had to leave a mark, to remind him he was not alone. The matriarch remained closest, her trunk never leaving his back, the rumble in her chest constant. The ranger's eyes burned under the sun, but it was not the heat alone. What they witnessed was rare, even in all their years. A calf returned from the edge of death was being folded back into his herd, not with force or fanfare, but with gentleness beyond measure. It was a sight that stripped words from them. More than once a hand moved quickly across a face to wipe away what none wished to speak of. The herd closed tighter around him until the calf was hidden among their legs and bodies. Dust rose as they shifted together, and for a time he disappeared entirely from sight. But the rumbles continued, soft and steady, telling the rangers that he was still there, still alive, still theirs. By late afternoon, the light had softened, turning the plain a muted gold. The calf remained within the shelter of the herd, pressed close between the matriarch and a younger female. His body still trembled, his legs unsteady beneath him, but he no longer lay collapsed. Each time he shifted, the herd adjusted around him, trunks brushing his back, flanks pressing gently against his sides. They were holding him upright in ways no rope or hand could manage. When he tried again to rise fully, the matriarch stepped just close enough to steady him with her trunk. The calf braced against her, legs shaking under his weight. For a moment he stood, wavering like a branch in the wind, then nearly folded again. This time, instead of falling, he leaned against her side. She did not move away. A low rumble passed through her chest and the herd answered. It was enough. He found his footing, unsteady but real, and took his first step forward. The rangers stood back in silence, their tools forgotten in the dust. They did not call out or move closer. They only watched, every breath caught in their throats as the calf swayed, then steadied, then stepped again. Each small movement widened the space between life and death. Each step meant he might live. If he stopped walking, his chance would vanish. If he kept going, he could rejoin them fully. The herd closed in tighter, shifting like a living wall. The matriarch remained beside him, her body angled just enough to block the setting sun from his eyes. Another female nudged his flank from the other side, guiding him forward. Slowly, awkwardly, he walked between them. His ears lifted for the first time in hours, flapping weakly against the dust. His trunk curled once, rising toward the matriarch's shoulder before falling again. It was not strong, but it was unmistakably his. Step by step, they moved together. The rangers counted each one. their hearts tightening with every shaky pause. He did not fall. His legs bent dangerously more than once, but the herd adjusted, their bodies forming a moving circle that shielded him from collapse. Dust rose around their feet, catching in the golden light as though the air itself carried them forward. The sound of their low rumbles rolled across the plain, steady and unbroken, guiding him deeper into their midst. By dusk, the calf was no longer struggling at the edge but walking. However slowly within the herd's full circle. His steps were uneven, his breath still rough, but he was moving under his own strength. The rangers did not follow. They knew the rescue had reached its end. Their part was finished the moment the herd took over. To intrude now would be to undo what had been restored. They stood in stillness, watching the silhouettes of the elephants grow softer in the falling light. Dust curled upward from their path, glowing faintly in the last stretch of sun. The calf, once half-buried and gasping, now walked where he belonged, not beside men with ropes, but within the circle of his family. The rangers remained behind, their faces lined with exhaustion, their eyes wet with what none spoke aloud. When the herd finally crested the ridge, their shapes blending into the horizon, only the sound of their rumbles lingered. The plain fell quiet again, holding the weight of what had passed. The rangers gathered their tools in silence. None needed to speak. They carried the moment with them, the image of a calf walking away into dusk, alive because he had been given the chance to rise.